Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Office Hours. It's good to see you. Alex is still under the weather. He's still recovering from COVID. He sends his best wishes to everybody. He's actually doing fine, but it's going to take him another day or so. So we just wanted to say, get well fast, Alex. And if you're watching on YouTube, as always, you can find out more about what we do on officehours.global. Our first hour is usually general discussion, and it will be as well today, production-related questions. The second hour is where we typically take a deeper dive into a topic, and today is a little unusual. If you had looked at the schedule before and were coming today because we had an expert in typography, I was really looking forward to that myself. Because Alex wanted to make sure that he was here for that, that's going to be rescheduled as soon as we can. So today we're going to do the third or fourth part of what we've been doing all week. On Tuesday, we talked about sound, and specifically in the frame of looking for your advice to us on what topics you'd like to see us cover in the future. Then on Wednesday, we did that for graphics. On Thursday, yesterday, we did that for video. Today, we're going to open it up for general questions. So this is really your chance to kind of help us program office hours. So if you have any general suggestions about topics or subjects or guests you'd like to see on office hours, today is your day. Put them into the general question queue and be sure to tag them as second hour topics. So all that said, we're ready to dive into the show. So Mitch, let's go.
Thank you, Bill. We're ready to go with our first question from David Brady in New York, New York. Trying to light my studio right and prevent the differences from opening bright pages from changing everything. What's the best rule of thumb? Lights full and stop down the camera? I'm lost on this stuff.
And Mitch, you wanted to dive in on this, so start us off.
I'm diving. It's kind of like game staging, Dave. You already know that. And you start with the most important thing, and that's the camera. And the normal settings, I don't know, mine's at, I'm looking at it right now. And here are my settings to start with. You can see them at the top. And 800 seems to be the magic number, and the iris is stopped up to 3.5, so I get that depth of field. And then I add the light after I've got the camera looking relatively good. So that's my 2 cents on it. I'm not an expert.
And Courtney.
Well, if you're talking about your screen that you're looking at washing out your face in comparison to the rest of the lighting, the trick is to put your computer into dark mode. And if it has the ability to also open web pages in dark mode, because a lot of times you can set it to dark mode, and sometimes it depends on whether it's a Mac or a PC, whether the browser opens in dark mode or the apps or the Finder opens in dark mode or not. And the second is to reduce the brightness on your monitor or the backlight. If you have a backlight level on that monitor, drag that down. Then drown it out with front lights. Get you a good panel light overhead that is at least 4 to 5 times brighter than your screen, and then stop down to the appropriate level so your face looks right. And then the screen shouldn't make that much difference on your face then. The only thing you got to worry about is reflection in your glasses then.
I don't think my face will ever look right, but yeah. Okay.
Chris Fenwick is going to slip in on this.
I couldn't agree more, David. No, I think what Courtney was saying is the same. And yes, we are talking about the fact that we're sitting in front of these, giant monitors, and you put a white screen on it, and it becomes a huge soft light. So I think the possibly, the whole level in your at your desk there might be too low. So if the key light and the fill light and everything were brighter, the intensity of another white light won't be as dramatic, right? And I'll tell you that, and I'm not a lighting expert at all, but I have learned over the course of like the last pandemic that I need a whole lot more light than I started with, like a whole lot more. And I used to look at my camera and I'd go, God, it really looks noisy. And then I started putting light and was like, oh, oh, that's what it was. I mean, cameras like light. We live in a world that's bound by physics, and they like light. And I am sitting at a desk that is probably, 5 or 8 times brighter than it was when I started office hours. So it might be that. And I'm sure there's some science and some numbers and light meters and stuff, but It's a ratio.
And David Brady.
Yeah. Earlier I was messing around with turning the production lights up, but then I washed out my ice blue background, and I don't want to do that because that's my signature thing. So
we all love an ice blue background. So my trick to that, David, is I don't have a key and a fill, or sorry, I don't have a key and a fill. I have a key and a fill. My light, let me see. Can I show that? I have to move one browser off my screen. Give me 1 second because I've been asked not to show that. So my key is way off over there, and my fill is very much to the side there. And then you can kind of see right here, this is a piece of cardboard. I have big giant flags. So if this is my key light, if I take the flag and turn it, look what happens in my background. That's my background, because that's a soft light. So, but the flag, swing the flag back in. Look at that beautiful ice blue. But it also means if I sit back here, I'm out of the light. So it's about controlling the light.
I think what you have just explained is a beautiful example of what we call in lighting controlling spill. If you don't control the spill, it affects everything, and you can't get those rich colors. David Brady wants to get into this too.
As a one-man operation, what do you use to, I guess I got to get a mannequin or something, or one of those float head things to put here just to kind of.
David, you have all day to play with this.
True. Okay. Today.
Yeah,
anyway.
one good trick, David, is to turn off all the backlights and just light yourself, and then notice how much of the light, the key light and the fill light that's hitting you, is infecting your background. How much is it spilling back there? And then you can think about where to position those so that they hit you, but they don't spill to the background. So if you can keep the background darker and keep you properly exposed, that's the point where you can add colored light to the background, and it will remain colored light. So hopefully that helps everybody. Mitchell wants to get in before we finish.
I just want to say it's a work in progress. You're going to constantly be adjusting it. It's like when I got done 6 months ago, I thought maybe I need something to highlight my beautiful forehead. So I put a hair light behind me, and that's the difference. It just lights up the specular on the side of my head and the hair. So again, that's just something I added later. So I got, key, fill, hair, what little hair I have.
And this is why there are
a long time ago.
This is why there are lighting designers, because this is a complex thing, and people spend their whole careers mastering this idea of being able to light people beautifully. Let's move on. Next question.
Next question is in from some character named Mitchell Hill. Must be me. What do you use to convert a YouTube link to a QuickTime video?
John Preto.
I use Downy to download it into YouTube, and then I use either FFmpeg or VLC or Blackmagic.
David Brady.
Yep. And I use there's a graphical front end for FFmpeg for both Mac and Windows. And I forget, one is called FFworks and the other is called My FFmpeg. And gives you a nice GUI to do the FFmpeg stuff, because the command line can be a little daunting.
Yeah, I think Handbrake also does the same thing. It provides a GUI for FFmpeg, but it's almost always something that's driving FFmpeg on the back end. Next question.
And it's for me again. The heck. What Apple app would automatically make a nice montage of a bunch of slides?
Ooh, nobody has weighed in on this yet. I did a quick search in the beginning on montage creators for iOS, and there are quite a few. I have not used any of them. I tend to just do my compositing in my nonlinear editing, but Chris Fenwick has some ideas, and so does Courtney. So Chris, you're up.
So years ago, I had a client who I used to do happy face videos for all the time, a couple a year. And this is like the 2008, crash era. And they were like, "Ooh, yeah, we're not going to use you to do that." I was like, "Okay." And they told me at the end of their conference, the CEO said, "Well, don't we have a video?" "Well, no, we had to cut the budget." "Well, you have to do something." And so she had to throw together an awful slideshow. She called me up afterwards. She goes, we will never do that again. The following year, in order to help them save money, I said, "Look, let me come with a DSLR. I'll take beautiful photos and I'll make you a great slideshow. We won't have a video." As it turns out, with a DSLR. I shot a bunch of video. So anyway, I was doing it one-man band, which I hated, but I was trying to give them some sort of, service and keep working. And so what I ended up doing is I would take the slides and I would throw them into Keynote very quickly and there's a, it has automatic, slideshow template-y things. And I would kick out little hunks at a time. Like, here's 20 slides of this dinner event. And then I would kick those out as MOVs and drop them into my editor. So I would just do little hunks. And it has, look, it folds over and it slides over and it does push. So the short answer, I apologize for going so long. Try Keynote.
Courtney.
Well, iMovie, I think, does that for you automatically. I think it has a theme. You can apply a theme and point it to a selection of still images and pick a music track, and it will create a slideshow for you. And you can put in Ken Burns moves on them so that they automatically do a slow push in before it transitions to the next slide or so on. Then you can rearrange the slides if you want to, but I think it'll automatically do it. At least when I did the original commercials for iMovie back when they were on the iMac, and it had that feature back then. I assume they haven't taken it out.
David Brady's next.
I think, and if I'm not mistaken, Photos has something rudimentary like that where you can, take an album and it'll generate a slideshow for you there. I'm not sure if it renders it out. Chris with the finger up.
I would like to append my answer. It was Photos I used and not Keynote. So strike all that other stuff. Strike the long intro. Strike this long apology. The answer is Photos.
The Wayback Machine.
I think we're going to go to Guy Cochran and let him bring order to this chaos.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Is just any album inside of the Photos app will allow you to make a slideshow. And then if you want to pay, there is... from our friend Oliver Breidenbach over at Boink Software. He has the #1 app, and that's PhotoMagico. So it starts with an F. I'll put a link in the chat for PhotoMagico.
Cool. Okay, we got to there. Next question.
I just was writing that down. Thank you. From Douglas Carmichael, I read an article stating power consumption in the New York City area dropped by hundreds of megawatts due to the closure of all theaters and venues. Would you consider this solely an observation, or is it a wake-up call to be more efficient in our industry?
And Courtney's going to start us here.
Well, it's kind of an observation. Billy Joel did a song about the night the lights went out on Broadway. Even if you get more conservative, and these days a lot of cities are transitioning from tungsten-based lighting to all LED lighting, especially for the street lights, and any signs is all transitioning to LED, and that saves you about 80 to 90% of your power consumption by going from tungsten-type lighting to LED-type lighting, or even from mercury halide or any of the other gas discharge type tubes. You're saving a considerable amount of electricity there. So there should be a considerable savings by that transition. And I think the difference in wattage consumption just during COVID, when all the theaters were closed, is measurable, of course, because they're not lit up. They're not running their air conditioning, which is the most major consumer of electricity is heating and air conditioning. So if you're not heating and air conditioning those public spaces, it's going to make a big amount of difference in the amount of power consumption. So that's really all it's a reflection of.
Tom Ferguson.
Yeah, I was just going to simply say more LED, less carbon arc.
Yeah, some of you don't remember carbon arc. We used to have follow spots in high school, and it had a big 220 power thing, and you'd put these two carbon arcs together, and they would just burn with an intense light, and that's how you got a spotlight on stage. Fun technology. David Brady is next.
Yeah, well, as the resident New York City person here, I think it was the mass exodus of people that also added to that. All I know is my Con Ed bill went up a little bit, but I've been running my AC a lot. It's been hot here.
There you go. All right, next question.
And it's from Angelo Jack in Brooklyn, New York. I use a Sony A7S3, Mix Pre 10, Rode Go 2, and need reliable production-level wireless video transmission system for ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. Any limit on number of transmitters used concurrently, working with children, and cannot run wire in the space.
And Guy Cochran's going to help us here.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people using these ones. These are the Vaxis units, and the nice thing about these ones is that you could power them from USB-C or with an NP style battery. So these ones are under $500. There's also the whole Hollyland, and if you want to go big, then you've got the Teradek Bolt line. And as far as how many you can get, it depends on if you're at the 2.6 or the 5.4 gigahertz. There's 8 channels at least on the Hollyland, so more than most likely you have cameras or sources. So there you go.
Okay, moving on. Next question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael. When a major act has a musical director, usually the piano keyboard player, what is their role if they're not conducting the band and orchestra?
David Brady.
Well, I'm not really the music guy, but my understanding that music director kind of sets the tone for a performance and is the point person to keep everybody on point, for lack of a better thing, with as far as tempo and changes, etc. They might not conduct it directly, but guarantee you everybody else in the band is following that person for the Frank Zappa eyebrow thing or a slight point to kind of give somebody a cue.
Courtney Gooden.
If you're dealing with a vocal performer, Liza Minnelli or Frank Sinatra, et cetera, they take the cue. They usually sit at the keyboard and they know that performer in and out, and they know the set sheet, so they know which song is going to come up next. And if the singer starts to ad lib something at the beginning, they can vamp and they can cue the orchestra to vamp and continue the lead in for another 4 bars before they actually pick up the downbeat and start the song. So they're really controlling the tempo of the music and the lead in when it starts and when it ends. It could be that the singer is wants to get out of the song into the next one because the audience isn't reacting, and they may try and cut it 4 bars short, and the musical director has to or 10 bars short, the musical director has to pick up on that and be able to bring the orchestra to a close and cue them, like going to number 3, going to number 2. So that's what the musical director is doing, is keeping everybody together on the same page when things change during the song.
And next question.
And it's from Chris Fenwick in Emeryville, California. I recently had to work on a project that involved a surround sound 5.1 export from Final Cut Pro 10. I have interesting things to share about that process, but I'd like to learn how to build a 5.1 monitor system.
And Chris himself wants to weigh in on this. Chris, you want to go farther?
Yeah, so I just realized my question didn't even involve a question mark, so I apologize to the universe for that. So what happened was, and the thing that I'd love to discuss, and we talked a little bit about some of this before the show, was that, I don't care, how to, set up a 5.1 system in my living room and all that. And I know that's important, and there's good ways to do it, wrong ways to do it. I'm really trying to get to the post-production process. And I know that I think Charles Klein is a person. I really wish Charles was here, because I think he has a 5.1 system, or maybe even Atmos, in his edit suite. So what I learned is that Final Cut 10, although it has the feature of surround sound, it doesn't really work very well. So you'll hit export, and if you take that file and you monitor it through proper monitors and also meters, outboard of the Final Cut edit system, it jumbles stuff around and it puts stuff on the wrong tracks. And, there'll be literally I did one export where everything ended up on the left channel. How is that possible? Now, when I look at it on the meters in Final Cut, it looks fine. So what I wanted to show, if y'all don't mind, this is the export window out of Final Cut Pro. And the thing that's circled up there is the Rolls tab. Now, Bill was mentioning this before the show that, rolls. And hold on, I got to get it to the right thing. So that thing right there is really key to how to get the audio to plan your audio export. So when you click on that, the window looks like this. And it says over there, QuickTime movie, rolls as a QuickTime movie. If you pull that pull down menu down, I didn't make a slide for it because I forgot about it. There's a selection for it's like multi-track audio, QuickTime, something, blah, blah, blah. And then you get to this magicness. Now, the way this screen works is when you first see it, it doesn't have all the tracks that I just had. But if you click where it says add audio track, you can add a track, and then where it says channels, you have to select it as mono. It will default say surround. So select it as mono, and then under add roll, you pick the track. So you can make a channel and you pick a track. You make a channel, you pick a track. And if you see up in the upper left there, it says Fenwick Multi-Channel 5.1 because, I made my own preset. I'm just trying to get my name said more often, always and forever. So, but that turned out to be the trick to actually tell it, boom, boom, boom. Because apparently there's different brands of 5.1. There's like the SMPTE standard, and then there's another LMNOP standard. And the dialogue or the center channel and the low frequency information, LFE, sometimes those in the different standards are on different tracks. So, but you can totally tell it how to shuffle the tracks, which is bonus goodness. And so when you do that, you have access to like 16 tracks. So you could deal with a very heavily thing. And then the next question, and again, I don't care about your living room. I'm sure you do, but not for the purposes of this question or non-question, as I stated. How would I build that? Like, what device on your computer box would you set up if I was going to build a 5.1 edit suite?
Okay.
And I'm done talking.
Okay. Mitchell wants to raise his hand.
All that said, I'm not sure I can comment. No, just kidding. First of all, I think you need to have a decent 5.1 monitoring system in your studio, because otherwise you're just dealing with channels and you think it should go here and this might be a good volume. There are so many examples of bad surround mixing out there on commercials and documentaries and maybe even some movies. So the way I would approach it, Chris, is to start with 5 speakers and a subwoofer, and do that with some kind of a grid network in your ceiling, because you're going to want to adjust those speakers. And I haven't done it yet. I'll admit that all my talking here is theoretical. But if you build a grid in your ceiling and you hang those speakers, whatever they are, in my case, they'd be Genelecs, and after you're recovered from your wallet being depleted for the next 20 years, you're going to set those up. And then you need some kind of decoder as a reference to decode that 5.1 to get the right thing. And I'll leave that to Courtney to talk about the mysteries of decoding that kind of mix. But actually, you got to start with the speakers.
Actually, we're going to go to Nigel next, and then our dear friend Mickey McIntyre in the Philippines has weighed in on the panel chat, and I will read that out. So, Nigel, you're up.
I'm sure whatever Mickey has to say is better than what I have to say, but my observation would be I would actually go the other way, which is I would think about what AVR I want to use to create a system that would allow me to hear that. I don't know there's a piece of software that on a Mac, and maybe there is, that will simulate an audio-video receiver. So I think you've got to buy an audio-video receiver that can do 5.1, 7.1, 9.1, whatever it is, and then put a set of speakers the other side of that. And I think when you've decided how much you want to spend on your AVR, then you don't want to put a set of speakers the other side of it that are wasted. So I can sell you $150,000 worth of speakers, but it's no point if you don't put a decent AVR on the other side of it with amps. So I'd start building up, but I think you probably need a separate outbound system.
Yeah, that seems To comport with what Mickey says, Mickey wrote into this, Chris Fenwick, you would need an audio interface with at least 6 channels of outputs, a 5.1 or larger monitor processor, a 5.1 or larger monitor controller, and lastly, a 5.1 speaker system. It's an oversimplification, he notes, of course, but those components have to be in there if you want to do a full-scale 5.1 mix in your edit suite.
Does anybody know what Mickey means by monitor 5.1 monitor processor? Mickey, you should join.
It's just an AVR, audio video receiver that Nigel was talking about that has, a decoder in it. Don't read 5.1.
Yeah, but I think at that point you're kind of in the living room experience. I just need 6 cables coming off the back of my Macintosh to hook up to. I'm being nodded off by. I don't get it.
Well, there are audio cards, I believe, or things that allow your computer or your laptop, if it's hooked to an outboard processor, to get those 6 channels out. I've seen them around, so I think there's some research to be done there. I don't know what they are, but I know Nigel wants to hop back in on this, see if we can.
My only observations, if you could do it from an audio card that would put out your, how many channels, you probably want to test it using an AVR, because that's probably how the other side is going to listen to it. So you'd want to simulate the environment.
I think that's the real disconnect, is like in the edit suite, it would appear, and God, Mickey, I really wish you were here. In the edit suite, we're listening to it in using one set of technology and speakers and Bear's Oh My, and then we deliver it someplace else, and they're using totally different technology, like literally different technology, because they have to like demux it and spread it out and blah blah blah. And I think that that's probably why so often when we sit there on Netflix or Hulu or Apple TV and you're listening to it, it's like, really? Did somebody really think that sounded good? How is that possible that somebody went home at night and said, that was a great mix. I really nailed that thing. Because some of it is awful. And the thing is I think that I don't think that people take into consideration, and I know Mickey does because I've worked with him, but I don't think people take into consideration that like some people are just going to listen to it on their speakers on their TV.
Yeah, and it all has to be collapsible down to either a stereo, which many people have, or even mono in the case of something smaller than that. Mickey has some other additions here in the panel chat. He says in the first one, when I say processor, it's a system to time align and EQ your monitors to your room. And in addition to adding an EQ curve that is required for your specific delivery format, that was new information for me. I didn't realize that there were different EQ curves or different delivery formats. And he gives us an example. Dolby requires a specific Dolby X curve applied to the monitoring system if you want to get accurate results. So there's all sorts of depth to this. Again, Tuesday is going to be audio day around here, according to Alex's new plan. So this might be an excellent topic to bring back and dive even more deeply in. I think we spent enough time on this for the general day.
I'll fix my slideshow for next Tuesday.
Thank you. Yes. And I'd prefer you to make a 16 millimeter film that you can show and push into the feed here. All right, we're going to move on to the next question.
Moving on to Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts. On macOS, the Audio MIDI Setup app has some interesting controls and device information. What have you used it for?
And we don't have anybody who's weighed in on this at this point. Oh, there we go. Chris Fenwick's going to take a shot at it. Chris, go ahead.
So, head back to audio. Next Tuesday, this is what we're going to talk about. The audio MIDI setup is super important when you get a new audio device, because many audio devices need to be tickled before you start using it. For example, the Mix Pre's that many people around here use. Thanks, Alex. When I bought my Mix Pre 6, it defaults to 2 outputs and 2 inputs on the USB bus. But if you go into the audio MIDI presets, I can get 8 outputs from it and 4, I believe, inputs, USB inputs. And that actually starts to open up a whole bunch of possibilities of what you can do with it. So but you don't get access to those until you actually engage them in the audio MIDI presets. also, you can create what is called an aggregate audio device if need be in audio this thing that we've been talking about. And so like you can gang a couple of outputs together and then make a new virtual output, or they call it an aggregate audio device. So it's super important to know that it's there. I know that when Preto got his MixPre 10, that was one of the first things we did, is we went in there and we engaged all the inputs and outputs. And when you start coupling that with stuff like loopback, which I am a huge fan of, you can actually like take whole apps and send that app just to one particular output. So like I use the 7 and 8 output from my MixPre, and I take the microphone and I say, just take my mic and just send it out those outputs, and only that forever and always until the end of time. And then in any app where I might want to record my voice, I select that as my input. And regardless of everything else that's going on my Mac, like maybe a Zoom meeting or a thing or a whatever, those outputs, which I've engaged through the audio MIDI thing, they always just have my mic. So it's super important.
Audio MIDI setup, I think, is the invoke. But yes, absolutely. David Brady has the thought.
Yeah, the aggregate audio device is the thing I use it most for. Just the other day, friend's band wanted to show their new video at their local pub. I rolled in with my rig, had 3 USB 3 to HDMI things, pumped them into 3 TVs, aggregated them all. So I was using the 3 speakers sets for those TVs, and it worked like a charm.
There you go. All right, next question.
David Brady again from New York, New York. Zoom Room Dark Mode was released in version 5.11. For the life of me, I cannot get the iPad controller in this one room to flip over into that mode. Any clue what's going on?
And it looks like Guy Cochran's going to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I would take a look in the back end to see what version that controller's on. So when you open up the room, you can see the computer name, but you can also see the iPads or whatever you have and the app version. If you are up to the latest version and it's still acting up, I would just delete the app from the iPad and then reattach it.
Okay, I'll give that a shot. The only other thing I notice is the iPad is an older mini and it's stuck on iOS 12.5. I don't know if it's a 13.
That might be it too, because you can see here that it actually says what the system's on. So look and see what the good ones are, because you might have some of the ones that are on an older iOS that doesn't support it. So that's probably your issue.
Okay, moving on. Next question.
Liberty White, Toronto, Ontario. We shot a video podcast for a client, 3 cameras via an ATEM Mini. What's the best way to simultaneously record what's in the camera in portrait mode for social media?
And we're going to start with Guy and then go to Courtney's. Guy?
He said best, and you know we're expensive friends, so here we go. $3,499. Create your vertical video. So this depends on if you have a 4K output. I haven't tried it with HD, but basically it allows you to take a 4K signal and set up boxes. Traditionally, people are going to use it, in regular landscape mode, and then you could tap these sources in it. So 4K in, and then you can do HD out of these boxes. And as you tap, it switches the out. But now they've made it for vertical video as well. So you can see that they've selected a couple different vertical videos. And this one does record to H.264 right in the box. So $3,499, it could be yours today.
Look at the cool stuff you can get when you can throw a lot of money at these problems. Courtney?
Yeah, that's called a region of interest cropping device, an output device. I would say just, most of the cameras will not record in 9:16 unless you turn the camera sideways. And of course, then you can't do that if you're going through the ATEM, because everybody would be sideways. So produce your show, output it, and then just crop it and make sure when you're using, when you're shooting the show, that to do a guideline, like to keep the people centered in the middle of the frame so that you know where they're going to land in the crop. So you don't have to reposition them in the edit to position them where they will not be cut off once you crop it to 9:16 format.
And Chris Fenwick.
Hey, Liberty. Yeah, that's a good question. You didn't mention specifically, is the video, we shot a video podcast for a client. So it sounds like you're not trying to do it live. So I think the solve is 3 cameras via an ATEM Mini. Yeah, so you're definitely so you're cutting it live. I think the solve is, I believe with some cameras, you can actually record internally at 4K and then cut it, live to tape, so to speak. Tape. I'm like 1,000 years old. Live to tape. Roll tape, kids. That might be the best way to do it. And then, like, if you use the Resolve, I hate to stress this, but the Resolve thing allows you to actually open up a Resolve project that has the cut that you've already done. That's an interesting problem.
Yeah,
I think guys solve is really cool.
Well, that is a great device, and it would be nice because it would let you see your vertical crop. What I've resorted to is when I've been shooting in the field to actually put a little piece of acetate over my monitor and a grease pencil and mark where the vertical ratio is, and at least in the back of my mind, I can frame shots with an idea towards if it has to go vertical and if it has to get out fast, so I don't have time to pan and scan and actually post-produce everything to optimize those shots. I'll keep in mind keeping stuff in the frame where vertical won't cut 90% of somebody's face off and just have their ear in a shot. So it's just things to think about. David Brady wants to get in, so does Courtney. David?
Chris, I know you want to get your name on everything, so get working on a new Fenwick framer with that aspect ratio. Chop, chop.
There you go. There you go. Courtney?
And make sure you don't use any 2 up or 3 up like we're doing right now, because you're going to have to choose the center out of that. And if it's 2 up, you're going to see half of 2 people's faces.
Yeah, this is, this fact that we have, we've traditionally been widescreen for most of the history of television and movies. And now we have this new vertical thing, which I completely honor because I understand that people watch this stuff constantly and scroll through their phones. And if you've got a device in portrait mode, you don't have those sides. But it's a constant challenge. David, do you have something thing you wanted to say?
One last thing to that point of the aspect ratio. I think either LG or Samsung has a TV they're selling now that you can flip it and it'll go vertical, which I saw either online or in a speculative thing. But
that's cool. I haven't seen it in a TV. Computer monitors, of course. There's a good number of companies that make computer monitors that if you switch them around, they have some position sensor and they'll go vertical. Mitchell, do you have a last thought?
David, a lot of retail environments use that vertical mode because it flatters clothing and wardrobe.
Yeah, we used to have to produce a lot of vertical video for mall clients because they wanted to do exactly that. They wanted to have fashion displayed in the front, and they wanted the maximum size of a standing model's image to go in front of the store. So yeah, a lot of that happens in retail. Let's move on. Next question.
John Preto from Las Vegas, Nevada. Guy, you're wearing a 511 shirt today. Are you off to do tactical activities? Great stuff they make.
Guy?
Yeah, I'm going camping today. I do like the 5.11 stuff. I can thrash on it, and it doesn't bother me because it's meant for that kind of stuff. So I can go roll around the dirt or whatever. It's meant to take a beating, and so it's not going to rip and tear. So I like their stuff.
Good. I'm glad they make a quality product. I've never heard of them, but I just know that sometimes the same product with the word tactical in front of it gets about a 10% bump in price just because they're marketing. But I can imagine that people make products that are more robust for that purpose. Let's move to the next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida. Does ZoomISO support Zoom Smart Gallery? How do individual Smart Gallery participants show up in ZoomISO if supported? Thanks.
We don't have anybody in on this. Our regular ZoomISO, unfortunately, Andy Carluccio isn't here, who knows as much about that as any human on the planet. I don't think we have someone here today who is going to be able to address this, Andy. I apologize for that. But the good thing about office hours is this is the panel today. The panel will be different tomorrow, so maybe bring it back tomorrow and see if there's somebody who has expertise in this particular area. Move on.
Todd Perry, Prescott, Arizona, recording ZoomISO to ATEM ISO. I'd like to run that at another workstation and monitor it from my primary CPU. Is the streaming bridge the best way to do that locally?
And I think we've got the same situation coming here for Todd. Did anybody here use a streaming bridge or have experience with it? Looks like I'm not seeing any raised hands on the panel. So you may have just been unlucky for these last two in that there's no particular expertise and we don't want to just make it up. Although Chris is holding a finger up like he's thinking about maybe weighing in on this. He is weighing in on it. Chris.
Well, okay, so my whole life lives on one desk, so maybe this is not remote enough, you say, on another workstation. I actually run ZoomISO on another machine. I record it into an ATEM Extreme ISO, and I'd like to monitor it from my primary CPU. So I'm doing exactly that, and I absolutely don't need the streaming bridge. So Todd, I apologize. Maybe I'm interpreting this in an oversimplified way, but I don't think you need a streaming bridge.
Well, Guy has also raised an answer flag here, so maybe Guy has more input for us.
I'm curious if he's taking the output. If he's taking the output, maybe you can just convert it to NDI and then pick it up somewhere else using Studio Monitor. So that would be the way that I would do it.
Okay, so there's a couple of suggestions. If we've answered your question, great. If we haven't, bring it back again, and maybe a different panel with a different set of expertise will have more insight into this. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, for someone skilled in Windows, macOS, and audio-video networking concepts, how difficult is it to learn an LED wall setup mapping programming?
Oops, I don't hit the wrong button. I actually don't know anything about that. So that's another thing that's outside my expertise. And I'm not seeing any hands raised, so it looks like we're gonna. Oh, there we go. Courtney's gonna take a swing at it. Courtney, go ahead.
Well, you got to find out what software and hardware they're using to map the video onto the LED wall and learn that software, because there are several different versions of software that power video walls, and they're all different. So there's no common interchange that's used. I think Preto knows the most popular ones that are out there that are used for mapping video onto LED walls. But it's a very rare. I mean, there's only a few different handful of different programs and hardware that does that. So figure out which one they're using at whatever venue you're wanting to achieve work at and study that system.
Good answer. And Alex hopefully will be back with us very soon. I know Alex knows a lot about LED wall setup and instruction, so keep your eyes open for him appearing back here. We're going to hope it's going to be tomorrow. It might be Sunday, but whenever he is back on his feet and feeling comfortable, he'll be back, and that'd be a good point to ask when he's here. We also, I understand, I hadn't looked at the voting questions tab, but it looks like we're down to just a couple here. So if you have any general questions, looks like we have a pretty robust group for our second hour, but we've got about almost 20 minutes to cover here. So if you have any more general questions, toss them into the queue, and we will move on to the next one now.
Douglas, by the way, Talalek mentions Novistar is a pretty ubiquitous system. So if one is more popular than the other, just passing that on. And here's Douglas again with a question. Would there be any LED display manufacturers that can fit into smaller indoor spaces where you don't have the headroom to set up the truss?
Are these getting? I think they're getting a bit lighter. So I would imagine that there are different ways. Truss is the way I've always seen these LED display walls done, but there may or may not be a possibility. Anybody else have any experience with setting up LED walls here? We may not have any suggestions. So I'm going to paddle in the middle of the stream here for a minute, and maybe a couple of questions or not. And if not, we will dive over into our second hour topic a bit early. There is a lot to be talked about here. And just as a refresher for those of you who maybe didn't see, we had a special guest for the second hour today. That person needed to be with Alex for that because they had some plans here. I was really looking forward to that because he was a type expert and he'll have a lot of interesting things to say about the art and science of typography. And I know a lot of people are interested in getting text on the screens. But that is not happening today. Obviously, in our second hour, we're going to do general question and answer on where you'd like to see office hours go in the future in terms of the topics for us to discuss. Specifically, this is about Friday topics, and Friday topics will be a little more general. We have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday kind of blocked out as specialty subjects. So Friday is a good day to do general things, as is here. And it looks like we do have another question in. So go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah, we have another question to run down for the first hour. It's from Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin. I want to utilize my unused coax cable around the house. Is there an HDMI adapter box I can attach? Should I convert to BNC?
And Chris Fenwick is going to weigh in on this.
Jeffrey, I'm absolutely not an expert in cabling and wires, but I do know that the impedance, I think is the word, just because something is coax doesn't mean you can put any connector on it, and you have to be really careful. So just, and I'm not sure what you mean by coax. Are you talking about like the cable that, Comcast ran and stapled to the outside of your siding?
Yeah. In my experience,
be careful with cable.
There are a bunch of coaxes. It's not one thing. So you can get cat this or cat that, and they have different things. I know that I have tried to use a cable that I had a roll of for one purpose in another purpose, and it didn't do a good job of passing the signal correctly. Cables can be a pretty technically precise thing. So before you just take what's there and use it for a different thing, that might have been cable TV cable, and if you decide you're going to put a comm system on it or whatever, thinking it's a good wire, I'll just use it for that. Sometimes impedance connectors, there's a whole bunch of technical stuff behind these cables, and if you don't get them correct, it can degrade your performance. Mitch Hill wants to get
Bill is exactly right. It's an impedance issue. If you're using the cable TV wiring, it's probably a 75 ohm cable. And for broadcast, we generally use 50 ohms. But I know Jeffrey already knows that. So identify the cable. If it's an RG6, you're in luck. If it's not, I'm not sure I'd want to use it.
Okay, next question.
Gilberto from Santa Cruz, Bolivia. Does anyone know of a software that allows me to automate tasks like recording, trimming, and post-processing video? I'm working on ideas for a simulated VR booth, applying a background to a green screen recording.
There are a few things that can kind of automate video processors. One of the ones I used to use was Automator, which was an Apple tool that allowed you to control things like go here with your mouse and click on that, and using that in conjunction with an NLE where you knew you could set things up so you knew where that click was going to happen, was able to do some sorts of record a process of mousing around and doing things on your screen and then play it back when it was necessary automatically. So I used that with some success in doing simple tasks. I'm pretty sure there is also other software out there that is more sophisticated than just Automator that can do some things like that. I know there are batch processors and, kind of algorithmic, which just really means step by step, kind of record and then invoke those processes. Mitch has some thoughts on that. Mitch?
Yeah, essentially you're top and tailing, which is something we do all the time, and usually uses the audio track to determine that there's nothing there and then something happens, and that's probably the point that it'll automatically click it. But I don't think there's any AI out there that can tell that when somebody is ready to start taking the video at that particular point. So I don't have a specific answer for that, just general musing.
Chris Fenwick's up next.
In the early 60s, there was a commercial for VW automobiles. And the American cars were all sporting these awesome, amazing automatic transmissions. And the VWs were very much still manual. And one of the pushbacks that people had against the VWs was, well, I want an automatic. And their tagline was, in a couple of weeks, it is automatic. In other words, you get used to shifting. Don't be a baby, buy a VW. And so I think that Gilberto, some of the stuff that you want to automate, get some good people, and a lot of this stuff, it can happen so quickly when you get used to it. It'll feel automatic. And I think I'm partially speaking from the mind of an editor and speaking for all editors who I want to keep us all working. But I get a little defensive when I hear people say, I want to make all that stuff that you do automatic. It's like, do you really? Do you really?
Yeah, I'm going to support what Chris is saying in this respect. I think one of the things I had to do was top and tail a whole bunch of clips, but they were recorded in such a way that there was always, I think, 3 seconds of junk that I didn't want before the content that I did want started. And so that was perfect for an automator type action, because there are commands in Final Cut, and I'm sure there are equivalent commands in the other NLEs, where you hit a down arrow, go to the next cut, and then Automator could capture that down arrow and then also move 3 seconds in, invoke the cut, select with the C key, and then delete. That whole series of key actions could be done through Automator, and I could sit there in a whole big long line of shots and hit the Automator action, and it would go through and it would trim the tops of all those, which was hugely productive and useful for me, but only works if there's always 3 seconds. You know, it takes a human judgment to say, oh, wait a second, this one's 5.5 seconds, this one's 12 seconds, this one's 9 seconds. There's no real easy way to turn that into a simple automated system. You need somebody with a brain there making those decisions. So some things I think are good for automations, and some things just don't work out that well. Let's go to the next question.
Chad Lafarge from Columbia, Missouri. How do you gently tell a client that what they want is a bad idea? Do you have examples?
Let's start with Nigel here, and then we're going to go to Mitchell. Nigel?
So as a client, I don't think I've ever had a bad idea, so I wouldn't know what that felt like. I've had a number of partners do a number of things to me, like say, yes and is a pretty good way to then turn this round. But mostly what's happened is that the partner has said to me, what are you trying to do? What's the objective? What's the end goal? And by opening and going back a stage, it's allowed them to engage and explain why what I was asking for wouldn't necessarily achieve the objective that I thought it would. I'm not going to give you examples because I don't look any more stupid than I look on a normal day. But I would say at some point, you're never going to convince a client. If you can't convince the client, you can't convince the client.
I think we had a good example of the dry English sense of humor in the very beginning of your answer. Mitchell Hill wants to weigh in on this.
I agree with Nigel. He is absolutely correct. You never say no to any client. You just sort of say yes, and then you bring on the stuff that allows them to say no. And that is usually a budget. It's a bad idea because, you don't say bad idea, but, well, we can do that, but it will affect the overall outcome. It might destroy the show. There's all kinds of reasons that you can sort of position it so that the client really says, okay, never mind.
Chris Fenwick.
Just the other day, I got the opportunity to work with a brand new client, and I realized that there was a language barrier. We were using different words for different things, and that can sometimes their bad idea is your interpretation of their language. Like, for example, they had an issue with if I read the comment to you, it would be very interesting, but I won't. They were talking about an audio thing, and then they said, and we think it could be layered better. And I was like, to me, that sounds like an audio comment, when in fact it was, they had mashed together an audio issue with a comment about a graphic that was on the screen. And it was just, it's the downside of communicating via text, whether it's email or text messaging. So that's one issue. And I think the other thing is you have to realize that the ability to be able to tell somebody that's a bad idea or any variation of that is something that you have to earn. And there are many times when a person is hired because you know how to operate a piece of equipment and not for your aesthetic judgment. And if that's how you were hired, you need to respect that. You may have tons of input. You may have tons of ideas. And I'll give you the perfect example of this is the prompter operator. Okay? So prompter operators are really good at listening to people talk because that's all they do. But there's nothing more infuriating when you have a whole bunch of, sometimes weeks of background on why a piece has to be constructed the way it is. And the prompter operator, the guy sitting in the corner, hey, Courtney, is going, hey, I was thinking you could say this. It's like, shut up. I don't care. You're not here. You're not the writer. Here's the thing, though. Somebody like Courtney, his input is probably really good. But if you weren't hired for that input, shut up.
Okay, let's move on. You see, I asked for a bunch of questions and you people responded beautifully. I'm hoping we're going to get to all of them, may not. Courtney, do you want to weigh in since your name was invoked?
I do. I need to defend myself there. Well, you got to realize as a prompter operator, I've sat on the set with a lot of great directors and great actors and great writers. And I've sat there and rewritten many scripts with a great writer at my side. So I have a lot more of experience than probably an individual writer writing on his own does. So you acquire a great deal of knowledge, only I'm just a lowly prompter operator. And there are times, I just did a job 2 days ago where they said, we're shooting 2 cameras, so we need 2 prompters. And I went, and we had 112 scripts to do or something in one day. And I'm going, you do realize that the person can only look into one camera at a time, right? Yeah, but we, and we want another, okay, well, we're going to script where he turns from one camera to the other. And they're shooting the green screen background because they're going to lay a background in later. And I went, well, we can do that. And we did it. It was more money for me. I rented an extra camera mount. I didn't say anything. They could have done it just with a single camera and having him get to that point if they want him to look like he's turning to another camera, have him turn his head one way right at a certain point, then turn his head the other way, and then back into camera, and then cut out the part where he crosses in the middle and just change the background across the shot and maybe even change the size of the shot. You don't have to record a second camera with 4K video, load it into a system, transfer it, sync it up. All of that stuff could be saved with a single camera, but I never made that suggestion, and we shot it with 2 cameras, and after the 3rd take of him turning to the other camera and they realized that the lighting looked bad on the second camera, and if they fixed the lighting for the second camera, it messed up the lighting on the first camera. And so then they decided just to shoot it with 1 camera.
Welcome to the voice of experience. All right, let's move on. Next question. We got to zip through some of these, so we'll keep things tight now, guys.
Raj Chandel from Los Angeles, California. Lots of gear mentioned from the Office Hours panel. How would I locate a gear recommendation from a past Q&A about just can't remember the specific episode? Trying to find a recommended mic arm.
And so Nigel and then Guy, let's go real quick here.
Yeah, I can't answer the question how to locate it, but I can tell you the 2 mic arms that everyone talks about are the OC, which is the expensive one, and the Elgato low-profile Wave, which is the one that cheaper people use. And that's the ones we've most talked about.
Guy, a couple of thoughts?
Yeah, in the Discord, we usually will put some of the links, but one of the ways that we've found recently to look stuff up is a site called Filmot. It stores all the subtitles, so you type in the word ARM, you go to Alex's channel or the new channel, and then when you hit search, you'll get some results. Like this one, it says, Alex, what is the ARM that you mentioned? And then we can go to the next clip, because that might not be the one that you want. This one talks again about ARM. Here's another one in the studio where it says the word ARM. So again, these are subtitles. This is not searching the description or the title of the video. This is searching the subtitles. So there's 96 terabytes of data that this has been parsed by a nonprofit dude. And it is an amazing piece of
truly awesome.
Internet
that
to
is
know about.
Awesome. Awesome squared. Nice job. David Brady, you have a quick thought before we move on?
just to put a link for that in the chat. I never saw that before. But my thing, the bookmark folder that I have from stuff, that's how I do it. There was one arm that I saw called the Yellowtech Mika that was pretty slick. I don't know if that's the one you're looking for, Graham, but we're here to help. I'm
going to go right to that thing and type in the search term Dave is stupid, because there's got to be.
I noticed a lot of Fenwick popped up, and that's cool too.
Yeah, there you go. Next question, real quick.
Graham Cardwell from Belfast, Northern Ireland, trying to connect directly wirelessly to my access points for management purposes. Despite knowing their IP addresses, neither Safari nor Firefox will connect. What am I missing, or is there another way?
And we don't have anybody weighing in on this, so I don't know if we have anybody who knows. There is a graphic that somebody came up with. Looks like it's on deck for the Yellowtech Mika mounting system. I don't know whether that is specific to this.
No, that was for that previous question.
It was for the previous question. Okay. It got into the wrong place. Guy Cochran has a real quick thought, and then we'll move on to our top of the hour discussion.
Yeah, typically these are going to be managed by another piece of software. So like with the Ubiquity line, you log into the Dream Machine, and then those are attached. And so I've seen other systems like this as well, where then you can access the access points individually from that software. So you probably can't just hit it straight with its IP address. It probably needs something else to let you in.
Fair enough. Great. Okay, we've made it to the top of the hour. Thank you all for the standard question and answer. It was fun doing today. Now we are talking about the fourth in our suggestion series, which is you telling you people who are watching or listening or whatever, giving us suggestions about what you might want to hear in the next coming couple of months or years in office hours in terms of topics. We did audio stuff on Tuesday. We did graphic stuff on Wednesday. We did video stuff yesterday. And today we're opening it up to anything else other than those three technical disciplines that we might want to talk about. So the topic is open for everybody. We have a lot of people who have suggestions here. So probably the best thing to do is just dive in, unless anybody in the panel wants to raise a hand and say, there's some things I want to put in. Then we'll just go to the question and answer. So dive away.
First one in from Tom Ferguson in Phoenix, Arizona. I think we need some IT and network design for audio and video.
And Tom wants to emphasize that a little bit. Tom?
Well, there's so many ways you can look at this question. Maybe it's a couple of second hours, but just basic network design. If you think that your Class C subnet is going to work for you and you're never going to have more than 250 some devices, I think you're being a little narrow-minded. But if you open it up and you find out what you can do with a particular subnet, and well, anyhow, I'm preaching, but it comes down to there are so many things that we do that go over Cat5. We don't use as much of the Coax anymore, and so there's no impedance to worry about.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, when I started out, all the analog gear was analog and everything was done with cables that had been in use and processes that had been in use forever. And I rode through that change to video over IP and everything becoming digitized and computerized. And suddenly I was, instead of using standard XLRs and quarter-inch jacks, I was using all Cat5 and little phone jacks and things like that. And it took a while to get used to it and the change. So I think IT and network design now is audio and video routing and the rest of that. And the more time we spend helping everybody get up to speed, myself included on this, it does nothing but prepare you for the way it is going to be. I think, there's still some of those technologies that are around and they will be around for a long time. But, to ignore change is crazy when it's happening this fast. Guy, you had thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of times the people that are super geeky about this stuff, they're not the best presenters because they want to go down the rabbit hole on one thing. So it just depends on what we're talking about. Like in one of the after hours, I had Mickey help me set up a VLAN for Dante. And to me, that's something that, almost everybody should know. And I guess if you take a course, there's the Dante 101 courses and whatnot, they'll explain it in there. But a lot of times you don't have the personnel that could sit there and take something highly technical and put it into layman's terms. But yeah, I'd love to see one not just on networking, but also on NDI and Dante, specifically video and audio networking. So that would be a great second hour.
Yeah, I think fabulous, and it's kind of right in our wheelhouse too. I mean, that's what office hours is. What it was originally was a place where we all gathered together because we saw all this change coming. And during the pandemic, we realized there were other like-minded people who were happy to come into this and help everybody get farther along and learn the new technology that was just arriving on the landscape of our industry. So very cool thing. Yeah, let's do it. Next question.
Greg Greckmeyer from Topping, Virginia. Could the office hours system be used to cover an esports event, or maybe office hours builds one from scratch to see what could be done?
I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be. Now, esports is, it's a huge industry. First of all, there's so much out there, and there are, major players who are covering all of those fabulous, esports winter games and the snowboarders and everything. In fact, I think they were there on the internet and over the top broadcast before they ever got to the wide world of sports and the rest of those things. So it's a huge industry. Again, what we always look for is, do we have somebody in our community with expertise who can come and talk about it, or with contacts to somebody who knows something about that specifically, and how esports is different than covering a standard sports event. Guy?
Yeah, I mean, we use Stream Voodoo for the Cinegear event, and Stream Voodoo's roots are really in that esports arena because you can get 4K, believe all the way up to 60. So if you have the bandwidth, and at the other side you have a way to decode it on a powerful enough machine, then we're just converting it into our system, which is the Constellation. So it's all possible. I mean, I think it'd be amazing. It's just how many machines and how much hardware do you need to pull it? A lot of those guys are just doing that stuff local, boots on the ground. I've seen some of the wiring behind the scenes on those esports events, and it's amazing, because a lot of people don't want the latency of some kind of video tap pulling down their frame rate. So there's a lot of technical ways that you can get video in and video out of those systems. So it's just engineering at that point.
Yeah, I would imagine the engineering is really interesting. I mean, I was thinking about Wide World of Sports or something like that, covering something like a cross-country ski race, where you've got a huge geographic area and you've got to put cameras in places and get those signals back. And everybody now is thinking about, well, my phone can send something to a receiver, and that can get tied into the internet. And we're all kind of watching and wondering, when do these issues like the latency and delivery and robustness and the fact that you're not going to have dropouts, when is that going to continue to evolve to a point where it becomes a reasonable alternative to these old systems of stringing out huge amounts of cable and putting up microwave dishes? And that, that's the way they used to be done, because that was the only way it could be done. So what's on the horizon for that? All interesting topics, I would guess. Next question.
James Babbitt from San Diego, California. Could office hours have a second hour about home theater, audio, and video, maybe with Scott Wilkinson? And
our resident home theater guru, Nigel DeSalle, wants to pop in on this.
Yeah, I don't know Scott, but Alex might. If not, I'm sure we can find somebody. I would tell you that this is a big subject. And I think we proved in the last hour, just you can have an hour on 5.1 in your home theater, or 7.1 or 9.1 or 11. So if we want to do it, I would break it down a bit into audio, video. But there's room design, there's layout, there's sources. There's a lot of subjects. But a general one, if you can't get somebody, I'm sure we could find you someone.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be interesting. And Courtney has a thought.
And an offshoot of that would be marital counseling.
You've spent too much time in your home theater and I haven't seen you in 6 weeks. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Or you spent too much money on your home theater.
That's right.
I'm divorcing you.
Let's not get into relationships dynamics. That would be a long and complicated thing. Nigel, you wanted to weigh back in?
I didn't understand the comment, you spent too much money on your home theater.
Yes, of course you didn't. Let's move on.
Courtney Gooden is back from Hollywood, California. I'd like to see a show and tell on useful tools and gadgets, electronic and mechanical.
This is near and dear to my heart because, as I said, I used to go to NAB and those shows for a long time, and I would always try to find the booth with the little gadgets. I mean, there's just something incredibly attractive about finding that small tool that you didn't know you needed, but once you got it, it made your life much easier. The first time you saw a Leatherman or something like that and went, oh, wait a second, I put one of these in my pocket, and I'm prepared for a lot of things on the set that I'm having to go back to the toolbox for. So over the course of time, finding tools and gadgets is always things. And when we talk about that, and there is so much of that kind of hardware that is particular to our industry. We have a lot of little things, those, what am I thinking of? The orange boxes and the rest of those things. I mean, if you're not in the decimators and things like that, if you're not in the industry, you don't know they exist. But once you know they exist, they solve so many problems that learning about those kinds of subsystems, gadgets, connectors, it just becomes really, really fascinating to a lot of us. Courtney, you had thoughts?
Yeah, just little boxes, little tools, little things. Anything that can make Alex Lindsay go, ooh.
Yeah,
jump
it
onto
makes
his
me go
keyboard.
too. Yeah. Absolutely. All right, next question.
Dennis Wojtek from New Kensington, Pennsylvania. Here's a second-hour question. Would love to see how Office Hours is produced, the graphics creation, presentation, the switching, etc.
Yeah, we talk about that actually a good little bit, but behind the scenes, and most of you know who are watching the show, there may be some people who've come here who don't know about the back end of Office Hours. It is very robust. It is very deep. It is distributed all literally around the world. I mean, right now, our audio is being monitored by a friend of ours sitting in Philippines. Often the graphics are being put in by a fella in England. I mean, this is our daily reality on this show and has been for the I guess we're getting close to 800-900 daily shows. It's an amazing thing that production has become a cloud-based practical matter, and we do that every day here on Office Hours. To see behind the scenes is to see how really complex it is and how much talent so many people have that you don't see on the panel every day. All these people who are getting together and managing to make this a global phenomenon, really. Oh, Dennis just popped in. See, he was listening to me. 843 shows to date. So every single day since we started this in the pandemic, almost, I guess it's been 2 years now or close to it. It's just astonishing. So yes, as a practical matter, I know Alex has always been open to and excited about exposing as many of our viewers as we can to what happens behind the scenes, because this is part of his design for this show. And I think it's really one of the best things that he did about it was to say, it's not going to be us doing this behind a curtain for everybody else to just admire. It is going to be a workshop where people who need to know these things can come in, participate, and learn how to do them. And everybody, I will say, behind the scenes of this all volunteer effort, everybody has come to it because they're learning a lot about things that they find important to themselves. And we highly encourage everybody who watches the show, if you have time and are in a situation where you can do it, join that. There is some structure back there, and you really do have to go to the Discord first, and there is a part of the Discord that says, I'd like to work on Office Hours, and you kind of get some training and get in there and understand how it works. But then you can certainly sit behind the scenes and watch how the show is switched, how the audio is done, and the rest of that. So yeah, absolutely. I'm sure a behind the scenes look at how Office Hours is done will always be a part of this show. And you can get involved in that should you choose to. Let's move on.
James Babbitt from San Diego, California. Could Office Hours have a second hour about Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth, maybe illustrated with images from the movies?
That'd be interesting. Courtney has the thought.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I had the opportunity of spending some quality time with Joseph Campbell when he was still alive. I did a documentary for PBS or BBC on him and spent some time with him at his apartment in Diamond Head, Hawaii. And at Esalen Institute up on the coast for some seminars up in there. And it might be useful, although he doesn't really cover, technology and electronics. He was kind of baffled by his display writer that he used to write all of his stuff with. But I think as far as for writers out there, it's an important study, because Hero with a Thousand Faces and The Hero's Journey have been used by George Lucas and many other feature film writers to develop storylines. And it's useful. The use of mythology is useful in story development. So it's kind of interesting along that way. I don't know if it would relate to audio and video technology we have here, but more for development of storylines.
Well, yeah, and we don't get to do anything until we have a script or something that's written. And his Power of Myth was one of the seminal pieces that I read early in my life that made sense out of storytelling. I know our friend Sky, who's often on the panel, keeps bringing us back, I think, well designed to, if you don't have a good story, all the technology in the world is not going to elevate something that doesn't connect with people and make it something they want to watch. So all the technology, you can do a beautiful example of a lousy story or a disjointed story that nobody can follow, and nobody will watch it. It will not gain traction because you're missing that key part. So yeah, I think that would be interesting. I'm not sure how much time and how we could do that, but I do believe that script writing is one of the toughest things that happens in this, and anything that helps us all become even a little bit better than that is a good thing. Let's move on. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, flame pots and practical effects.
Ooh, we get to move into pyro. I'm not sure. I mean, if we could find somebody who could talk to us about that. When you say practical effects, that in the industry, that's jargon for something real that happens. You're not putting in the sound of the gunshots. You're recording the sound of the gunshots. That's a practical effect. Or, you're not doing a CGI explosion. You're actually blowing something up. Chris Fenwick, you had some thoughts?
I spent 3 weeks on the road with a crew once, and I would say this: the pyro guys, they were just weird. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, specialist to specialist, and you're working with volatile chemicals. That's not the easiest thing in the world. Courtney, you had thoughts?
Yeah, crazy is more like it, Chris. They attempt to do stuff. Yeah, the guys that set off, there's a lot of staging crews. I worked as a stagehand in my early years, and for like the Blue Oyster Cult and a few people like that had big, 10 to 15 watt lasers that were going into mirrored balls and shining lasers out into the audience, which I'm sure blinded thousands of people during their concerts. So safety was not high on their list, but these days there's a lot of propane, fire fountains that are used on stage for theatrical staging, things like that. So special effects and practical effects are used. Flying, wire work, that kind of stuff might be interesting for theatrical effects.
Yeah, an emphasis
on this particular
safety
tour, they had all this, flash pots and things like that. But in the last building we were in, they weren't allowed to blow anything up. So they said, well, we'll just do some cool fog stuff. And I'm backstage, and I was literally sitting in completely opaque fog, like from my chest down. Like I couldn't see my keyboard.
Well, and we do have to emphasize that in the production arts, there are areas where safety can be compromised if you don't have qualified people working on this stuff. And pyro is probably number one on that list. We've seen absolute tragedies or somebody inside a nightclub somewhere that was not prepared for it and trying to do their band's normal pyro, and it does not go well. So, but that would be part of the discussion, is how to approach this and do it properly. Mitchell?
Yeah, I can tell you how not to do it. I was hosting a 25th anniversary of Electric Factory concerts, and our artists were Kiss. And I was a DJ at a local radio station, and I was on stage, and this guy came up to me and said, "You can't stand here." And I said, "I've got a laminate that says I can be backstage pass." He said, "No, you can't stand here." So I moved about 5 feet to my right, and right about then, boom! The pot went off. So, we've got lots of stories we can share. And now I pay a lot of attention to stage managers.
David Brady.
Right. And for practical effects, make sure the napkin that the design is written on is got the proper scale. You don't want a 13-inch Stonehenge.
And is fireproof.
Bless Spinal Tap. All right, next question.
Tom Ferguson from Phoenix, Arizona. Tips and tricks for squeezing more functionality out of equipment we use.
That's interesting. Chris Fenwick and Tom Ferguson.
Yeah, Tom, this is something I'm totally passionate about. I think that too often we spend too much money just buying more stuff, gear acquisition syndrome, I think we call it. The question becomes, how risk adverse do you want to be? So I'll give you an example. I'm sitting here at coming up on how old are our computers, John? Almost coming up on 5 years old. iMac Pro with 3 screens on it doing entirely too much stuff. I'm really squeezing a lot out of it. But I'm not broadcasting the President of the United States either. So my risk aversion is much lower than somebody like, say, Alex, who has admitted to being very risk adverse. So he's more inclined to add gear and boxes and bears oh my, where I'm like, I think I could route that through another output over here, And so I agree. I think sometimes we add gear too quickly instead of actually learning how to, get more out of it. So I think that's a great topic. But it all kind of hinges on risk aversion.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, Chris. I think that, the reason that people have all of this stuff backstage, if you ever look kind of behind the curtain at things, amazing number of people doubled up, backups on top of backups. And it's exactly what Chris is talking about. You can't afford to fail at a certain level. And if you do, it damages your reputation in a way that can have a big impact on your bottom line. But there are a lot of other things where if you take a chance on a new technology, and I'm thinking of myself and the fact that I've shot with bigger cameras since the Betacam era, and I find myself shooting more and more on iPhones now. It took me a while to switch over and to get a level of trust with shooting on something that wasn't designed for shooting. But I also understand that I am that risk, if somebody says, hey, Bill, we found out you can get an XLR feed from the board. Do you want to do that? If I'm sitting there with an iPhone, I'm going, this was probably not the right choice for today. On the other hand, if I'm just going out and picking up B-roll, I can get a beautiful picture from that little machine that is perfectly cuttable into the stream of other stuff that I do. And so it's judging how much is a good idea. Let's move on. Next question.
Next question coming in from Tom Ferguson of Phoenix, Arizona. Test equipment. Enough said.
And Courtney is going to say enough.
Enough. I would like to see that as well. There's, growing up in the 60s and 70s as an electronic technician, with the, 40-pound oscilloscopes and, all kinds of meters and test gear. I'm always amazed by things like, this little device here, which plugs into your USB port and has a full color LED display on it that shows you, you can graph the power usage over a period of time, can tell you how much current, how much voltage it's being used, what voltage it's at, whether it's auto switching, whether it's auto charging, all that kind of stuff in a little tool like that. So yeah, I'd be interested in seeing something on those tools, oscilloscopes that can slip into your shirt pocket, things like that.
Courtney, I know enough about how this show works. If you don't put a link to that into the comments, people are going to write and be angry at us. So
I'll have to try and find it.
Yeah, it's called the C-Link by Courtney. That's the next iteration of a great tool that you've discovered for us. Next question.
Rajan Shandil from Los Angeles, California. I want to see live unboxings from all the unique gear everyone purchases, from cardboard to the reveal.
I'm only laughing at that because I'm just astonished that became a thing on YouTube and elsewhere. And I watched some of those for 4 minutes and we're hardly past the first layer. You're nowhere close to the actual thing that's inside the packaging. I guess packaging is its own thing, and maybe there's something deeply satisfying for people about watching somebody unravel the cellophane outer wrap perfectly. Courtney, what do you think?
Yeah, please let's not go there, because I've seen influencers spend 5 minutes on peeling the protective cover off the screen, really slowly.
Well, they got to have a lot of time to say and punch like and subscribe 14 times. So that's part of the process, I guess. Actually, the idea of looking at how to connect things in a kinetic sense in the real world, something where we're actually dealing with equipment and how to hook it up, I can see some sense in that, because sometimes it's a bit complex. Some things are easy to understand. others aren't. Like I remember there was the ATEM Minis had, if you plug into the first one, there's some circumstances it has a little extra processing because they design that for people putting their computers into it. And then if you put it into the second HDMI input, you're going to get a slightly different result. Those kind of things, to be able to see how that works, might be really useful for people. So maybe install and deinstall show might be useful for people. If you want to see something like that, then put in your vote. Next question.
And it's from J.J. McKenna in San Rafael, California. Building fly rigs with a green screen. Not sure this is funny or not.
Well, rigging is rigging is a big part of the grip side of our business. Flying any kind of a thing is its own thing. There are winches and towers and trusses, and we've talked about things like trusses. Also, some of those things are being scaled down. The big trusses you see in major concerts, you have micro truss now, and I think we've talked about them for lighting even in our offices right now. So there's some useful things about the industry that you're talking about, JJ, that might be useful to go over. So yeah, Mitchell?
I'm sorry, JJ, I thought you meant fly fishing.
No, that's a different kind of, that's tying flies as opposed to rigging flies. A wholly different thing. All right, let's move on to the next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. Cameras other than Blackmagic. I'd love to see Panasonic and maybe a couple of the ambassadors to talk about the S1s and box cameras and how they can interact with ATEMs.
Yeah, I that resonates with me a little bit. We tend to go to the things that we know, and we're very high on Blackmagic cameras for a number of reasons, and Alex has articulated a lot of them. The fact that once you buy them and get into that ecosystem, there's a lot of extra value you get because they talk to the switchers and they can be remotely shaded and things like that. But there are other major manufacturers, Panasonic, JVC, Sony, who make fine gear, and there may be a lot of their hardware that can be very valuable in this. So I think not being trying to be more ecumenical and talking about it for the people who own those things might be useful. Guy, what do you think?
Yeah, being a reseller, I go to a lot of these trainings, and sometimes they'll say something, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the panel and the audience on office hours would love to be hearing this. And I guess I should just put them in the vote them up in the second hour on the Discord, because that's really how these second hours get adopted. Is enough people, you get over 10 on a vote, it's almost definitely going to be a second hour. So the one that I guess I'll put in there is Red. I mean, I just got a Komodo, 16 stops of dynamic range, global shutter, the RF lenses. It's pretty amazing stuff. But then to hear about the LUTs and building the workflow in DaVinci Resolve, it's all very fascinating in the color and just the fidelity. And there's lots of comparison videos on YouTube, but I can get the trainer, the guy from Red, to come on if people vote it up. So I'll put it in there, and if you guys want to see it, vote it up.
I think that's a perfect example. It's throughout the industry, and we don't really deal with that level of technology very often. So, yeah, maybe there's somebody. We used to have Chris Summers who used to come in, and he works in high-end movies, and so he would, his expertise really helped us understand things like Panavision cameras and, the Sony Venices and things that are really at the high end. And it's interesting to look at those because those cameras where money is no object, I mean, they're going to be coming out of a leasing company, but the camera itself might be hundreds of thousands of dollars rigged as they have it on a movie. They do things with those systems at that level that can filter down to our camcorders and other cameras over the course of time. So it's useful to know about them. Mitch, you wanted to say something about this? Yeah,
I agree with you, Bill. I mean, even though they might be out of our price range, to talk about an Arri or a Sony Venice 2, all of those things, I agree. I'd like to know about the Komodo too, Guy. That's an interesting subject.
Yeah. Okay. Next question.
Next question from Raj Shandi in Los Angeles, California. Guy mentioned esports. How the back end of an esports event is set up would be a great hour. Thoughts?
Yeah, somebody mentioned that we had a little taste of that. We got behind the scenes both on the rocket launch and also on Formula One in specific shows. And it was because somebody had a connection and was able to connect Alex with somebody who could get us access to kind of behind the scenes. So if you want to see more in areas, I definitely put it in there. Definitely put it in the Discord. And if it resonates, or if you have a suggestion for somebody who might be open to a contact from the office hours administration team, I guess for lack of a better word, then yeah, put it in and let's see if it can get voted up, and maybe there's a show in that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael wants LED walls, pixel pitch, processing, mapping, rigging, etc.
I think this is a bit of a slam dunk, if only for the fact that Alex is very experienced in this and talks about it quite a bit. So I think a suggestion for that into the standard Discord mix would probably be looked at very positively. That may be one where he can do it and give us enough information to not have to look for outside people, but we might also look for outside people as well. So yeah, who knows? Next question.
David Brady, New York, New York. Workshops or series ARC to discuss some of the fundamentals of media analysis of shot composition, set, and graphics design, etc. We did a few a while back on After Hours where I piped a movie in no sound, and we discussed the tech and technique.
Yeah, I always love those, and it's a subject that I'm really interested in because I have learned so much by watching media. One of the best moments in my career came from, I was on a Sunday just relaxing, and I was watching the BBC Sherlock Holmes series produced, who was it? Jeremy Brett. And I just saw a scene. I thought, my God, that is blocked and composed so beautifully. And I started watching that series in terms of how they set up and moved the camera. Nothing other than that. I really stopped even watching the stories or whatever. And I was fascinated, and I just learned by osmosis so much about what to do and what not to do about actually filming things by seeing that. So I would think workshops where we look at good things, well done pieces of media would be fabulous. Courtney?
Sorry. I lost my mouse there for a second. The problem with all of those is YouTube. When we're streaming live on YouTube and we're trying to show clips or comment or analyze any type of commercial production stuff that's out there in the theaters or has been in the theaters or a television show or whatever, and discuss it for lighting, composition, or, direction, anything, it's going to get flagged. So that's the problem. We can do it in office hour and after hours when we're not on YouTube, but trying to do it as a second hour would be challenging, to say the least.
I wonder if it would have the same takedown threat if we did it as stills, if we grabbed frames from things that looked good and just discussed how they had lit or why they got the effect they did or something. It's an interesting thing to explore. David Brady has thoughts?
Just wondering if the 501c or using it for educational purposes could be a way around that. But the one thing I was referring to is, and Courtney was there for that, it was Grand Prix, I think was the movie, with that
Grand Prix, yeah,
with the camera like on the front of the car. And it was really enlightening for me to hear Courtney's experience and exposure to that from back then as myself. There's another site that I often jump back to called Newscast Studio, and it talks about television production and graphics and set design. I just found out that the place I work is launching some newly branded studios, and finding out in the media here and not through the emails that I get from everyone is kind of interesting.
Yeah. So, okay, they're in this topic is in the mix for things. Now go vote it up if you want more emphasis on it. Next question.
Gordon Lake, Los Angeles, California. Would like to see a second hour on building rack mount cases.
I think Alex would love that. I mean, he spent so much time doing custom installations and buying equipment and being able to take it on the road. It is a whole another thing, particularly since, like everything else in this industry, that's changed so much after shipping became more difficult after the after 9/11, it became far more difficult, and it's still expensive, and getting large amounts of equipment transported across things is a complex thing. So sure, I think that would be an interesting thing. Next question.
Nigel DeSalle from Austin, Texas. Maybe a workshop, but ZoomISO for beginners. Sometimes we jump through the steps too quickly.
Chris Fenwick wants to chat.
100%, Nigel. I couldn't agree more. I think that one of the problems that we, and we should all think about this. This is kind of an hour about the show, right? I think one of the things that we need to think about is that as we sit here and communicate with people, we have to remember that there are much more people listening to us than just, our friends and associates on this panel. And I think that although it may seem tedious to go through the steps, the audience outside of this panel, that might be exactly what they need. Now, that being said, we could still get tedious, and it's a definite balance. But yeah, the ZoomISO thing is, I could not have got through it without the help of Andy Carluccio. But I learned a lot of it, and if you want to learn stuff, ping me. I'll gladly walk you through what I learned from it.
That resonates with me too, Chris. And I will say that the way I learn, and I've learned this over the course of time, the fast kind of overview of a topic, if that's done first, even if I'm not learning the topic, gives me kind of an orientation. And at that point, that's when I go back and want to dive deeply into the details. So I almost think that presenting something that's really interesting, if any of you watching see a thing that goes too fast and it's really interesting, please don't hesitate to come back and ping us in Discord or whatever and say, that was a really interesting topic. I'd like to see that in more detail. And so get the overview and then get the drill down, I think is a very effective way for a lot of people to learn both what the whole thing does, but then how to do it step by step, which is very much what Chris is talking about, and which is really where the real education sometimes comes in for an awful lot of learners. Nigel has thoughts.
Yeah, so Chris, I think, caught the point. I was thinking of Fenwick and not really asking a question, but making a statement. And so my issue is I've been with you guys for a year, something plus, listening for longer, and I'm just getting to ZoomISO now. And I've noticed that I'm missing 58 steps. And if I bring that question up in the second hour or in a normal office hours, I'm going to get a very fast, useful answer. And I either have to ask 50 questions to get what I need, or somebody's going to say, well, let's do that as a workshop. The problem with the workshop is if I can't see, if I'm not available, they're often not recorded. And so I think there's a difference between, the office hours question and answer thing, a second hour deep dive where we ask generic questions, the workshop which is done off hours and not recorded. And I think there's a missing, how do I do ZoomISO education session, which may not fit into a second hour, but has to be recorded because otherwise we're not going to get it. My last point is there are people joining our community today or yesterday or maybe tomorrow, and sometimes we get bored of answering the same question. And it's not that we won't answer it, but we answer it so quickly and sometimes a little flippantly because it's such a boring question that if you were new to the community, it actually adds a bit of a barrier to entry. And we're going to have to keep an eye on that too.
That resonates with me entirely. I think I've articulated before. I've spent a lot of time early in my career in users groups, and we had that same phenomenon. People would come new to the users group. They want basic, and we all started in the early days of a users group with handling the basic questions because none of us knew what we were doing. And, the first year it goes by, and then a lot of people have moved to intermediate level, and then in the next year, a lot of people move to advanced level, and then you have consistently new people coming in who need grounding in the basic technologies and the basic fundamentals. You have a middle group who now has the expertise to help those people, but you also have a cadre of experienced people for whom answering the basic questions is like, yeah, okay, we got to do this, but that was 2 years ago for me, and I need to move on and really talk about the high-level stuff. Doing our best to cover all those constituencies, it's tricky. We try to do it, and I think we'll always try to do it, but reminders like the one that you just articulated, Nigel, is a really valuable thing for the whole group. So let's move on to the next question and see where we are.
Douglas Carmichael suggests transportation, carnets, air freight, sea freight, trucking.
Yeah, Alex has talked at length about that before because he has done so much international work, and we've had discussions on the show. We've had actual experts come in to talk about them. It is a complex and well, it's not super complex. I mean, people manage to do this, and there's always the throw money at one of the vendors who can handle all that for you. But at least that's another topic where knowing what a carne is, understanding how it functions, realizing the risks you run if you don't have that, because the last thing you want to do is bring your own equipment back in from an overseas shoot and have them want to tax you on the value of it as if you had bought it overseas. And that's what a carne is fundamentally designed to do. It's proof of ownership and proof that you did not purchase this expensive gear out of the country and are trying to avoid import taxes by just sending it to your home address in. So, yeah, complex schedule and complex topic, and one I think worth talking about. Let's move on to the next suggestion.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, Rodecaster 2 and sound pads in general for show automation with sound.
Mitchell wanted to talk about that.
I think it's a good idea. It's extraordinarily dangerous to put a soundboard or sound pad anywhere within my arm's length because I used to do a morning show on the radio, and you know how that can go.
Give a man a sound effect as opposed to teaching him to make sound or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, interesting. Courtney had a thought.
Yeah, it would be interesting. The problem is you can overgate its automation through MIDI, which is a bit obtuse for many people, and you have to map those MIDI commands to other systems in your computer. You have to use a MIDI driver in your computer to automate, use it for automation for switching cameras, things like that. So you have to go through a MIDI interface. So it can be done, but it's fairly complex, and I never took the time to figure mine out.
I resemble that remark. Next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. Gobos and outdoor signage. The new laser projection signs are cool, but it's a mature enough technology for a full second hour.
That's interesting. I had not heard very much about that. Courtney, do you have some expertise in that?
I don't have expertise. I'll tell you who has expertise is John Preto. He does a Halloween display that's projection mapped at a bar.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe he could do a second hour on his setup and how he does the projection mapping on that. This, of course, is the technique that's being used more and more for outdoor displays in theme parks like Disneyland does projection mapping on the castle at night for their fireworks show. It's quite amazing. There are a lot of downtown buildings that are doing projection mapping onto the buildings to put graphics up and for sports arenas, things like that. So it's being used more and more for digital signage is actually really high power laser projectors that are stacked up and mapped across the surface of a building so they can make the surface of a building look completely different, or put up an advertising display, and during the daytime you'd never know it was there.
And of course, you've riffed just long enough for John Preto to come back into his chair and not have any idea what we're talking about, even though we're talking about a topic that John Preto is probably our resident expert at. John, do you have your ears on, and have I confused you totally here?
We're talking about lights? Signage?
We are talking, yeah, we're talking about, the question was gobos and outdoor signage. The new laser projection signs are cool, but is it mature enough technology for a full second hour? And we've seen you do so much in terms of your projectors outside and things like that. Do you want to weigh in on how that industry is evolving?
Your Halloween pumpkin, singing pumpkins display. And,
yes, and that's all done with regular projectors. So I don't know these laser project. Oh, I don't have any laser projectors. Yeah, I think that they're just coming to fruition now for the regular people as opposed to being high-end stuff. And they're quiet, but they're still very, very expensive.
Okay, so it's something to keep an eye on. And, I don't know if you've noticed the same thing I have walking around the neighborhood during Halloween. People are upping their Halloween display game. A lot of people are doing more sophisticated things. I think I saw 7 to 10 houses this year with some sort of video projection incorporated into their Halloween displays, beyond just the little loop thing that, flies ghosts over your chimney. These were very sophisticated, and some of them were truly charming. There's a house in my old neighborhood before we moved out here where they back projected the window of their house, and they had a whole list of characters kind of peeking out at the kids who were coming by for trick or treat, and they made a whole little mini movie on their front window, and they gathered a nice little crowd there for their efforts. Courtney?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and thanks to global warming, and because of the drought in Los Angeles and fire hazards, fireworks have been scaled back, and a lot of municipalities are moving to laser-type shows or laser projection-type shows for the fireworks because they're non-flammable, mostly, unless you let the lasers stop for too long.
Yeah, I saw a show about drones for 4th of July displays. That looks like it's a potential to really change the game in significant ways. And so somebody will need to be designing and programming for those things. So that might be actually its own second hour.
The drones don't make that big boom.
No, I understand that. But they also don't put a lot of smoke into the sky so that you can't see anything after the first 20 minutes of the fireworks show. Fascinating topics. Put them in if you think they're worth doing. Let's go on to the next question.
Tom Ferguson from Phoenix, Arizona wants a LUT workshop, creation and application.
Tom, you want to say anything more about your thoughts about this?
Yes. While this is more a workshop than a second hour, I still think it needs to be recorded for the doomies as we acquire new devices, kind of like what Nigel was talking about. When we do something as an after-hours workshop, a lot of that information is lost.
Yeah, I feel your pain about that. I always feel like, FOMA is the acronym that's gained more popularity, just fear of missing out on. There's so much being developed and talked about, and you can't be everywhere at once to learn about things. LUTs are, that I know just enough about them to get my work done, and that is the process of camera LUTs to take the technology in a particular brand of camera and make it look beginning okay. We call that a camera LUT, so that when it comes onto my timeline, there's nothing about the way the camera record that signal that conflicts with my editing system, and so that I can see it in reasonable color and accuracy. And then the creative LUTs on the back end that people use to make to evoke mood or change day for night or all sorts of things in the background. It's a pretty big subject, and I'm sure there will be some that'll be some resonance. So yeah, vote it up if you want to see more on LUTs. Next question.
Guy Cochran from Seattle, USA. Second hour with Shane Hurlbut.
And Chris Fenwick has some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I know Shane, and I'll reach out to Lydia, his wife. He'd be really interesting. The guy's a cinematographer. His backstory is actually super interesting because I don't know if you know this guy. Do you know how Shane got started in the business?
I don't. I've only watched some of his workshops on MZ. And
Shane grew up on a farm, and he was a truck driver, and he drove like grip trucks. And he went from driving grip trucks to shooting, $100 million movies. So just that story alone, it would be really interesting to have him, chronicle how, those steps, because I think a lot of people, look at the film industry as this unapproachable, mega thing. And to hear how, he literally is just like, I know how to drive a truck. I can do that. And from there, he went on to shooting, big name movies. I know, and you've probably seen some of them.
I mean, before the show, Nigel and I were discussing, he'd mentioned The Offer, the thing that's playing on Paramount Plus. And one of the most charming things about that is you think that these people who made the Godfather movie were all these high-end Hollywood types. At the beginning of that, you find out these were just like jamokes who were in one business, and they met somebody and they knew somebody. And the next thing you know, they're producing the Godfather. It's insane how anybody, at least it feels like that, anybody with a certain amount of clarity of thought and talent who gets into something and works really hard and learns how to do it can become one of the leading lights of this. It's not that you have to have something magical in the beginning. Well, maybe you do have to have something magical. Maybe what I'm just describing is magical, but it's really, that's one of the most fascinating things about it is how few of the people who were responsible for that great movie really came, they hired a lot of people who came from the tradition of movies, but some of the people at the top really didn't. John Preto has a thought.
I always learn new words from Bill. Jamoke. I had to Google that one.
Yes, that probably goes back from watching movies from the 30s or 40s. That's, I think, a classic. Anyway, moving on. Next question.
Next question is from Danny Law in Malaysia. How about tips on projection mapping?
Yeah, Danny, I'm unclear. I know projection mapping in terms of what John was talking about earlier. We see people who manage with high-end systems to project beautiful things on things like buildings that do not have regular shapes. And I think that's generally what you're talking about, although I might be getting the term wrong. John Preto?
So, yeah, this would be great. I'd love to see some advanced technology. I use Resolume Arena, and it's a very difficult. Imagine After Effects with the timeline for projection mapping, and then laying out the geometry. So you have to go out and measure your house. It's absolutely it would be great for a topic for office hours.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating because, you can imagine if you've got a building facade that has some of it closer, some of it farther away, if you want that to appear from a distance as one contiguous picture, there's a lot of geometrical complexity that you're trying to overcome with the projection. It'd be fascinating, I would think. So, yeah, thanks, Danny. Good suggestion. Move on. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, production insurance, accounting, and budgeting.
It's not the creative side of the business, but boy, if this doesn't get done and done well, you're not going to be making things for a long time. We've had talks about this, and the subject comes up occasionally. These kind of back end or front office requirements. I know that in my career, as I moved up and got bigger and bigger budgets to work with, things like certificates of insurance to be allowed to shoot in a particular area, people wanting a P&L or something like that in order to get a project off the ground, those things become more and more important. And if you don't understand what the people on the financial side are looking for, it's really easy to make mistakes or come off seeming like you don't really know what you're doing. So I would think there would be some resonance there talking about how to make this into a business and do it properly so that you don't make more mistakes than you can afford to make. Next topic.
Danny Law from Malaysia. Difference between EF, MFT lenses and their pros and cons among the two, and when to choose one over the other.
So the Canon EF system and Micro Four Thirds are slightly different. They use different kinds of lenses. And the thing is, these are two little steps into a huge discussion of lenses. I mean, those are two out of dozens of different kinds of lens mounts and lens levels. And, you got B4 broadcast lenses. There's a world of technicality in that piece of glass that images the world and puts it on a sensor and makes it look how it looks. People spend their entire lives, cinematographers spend big chunks of their life understanding the characteristics of lenses and learning how to choose the right lens to get the effect the director or the producer or the director of photography wants. It's a complex thing. It'd be interesting to hear more about that. Courtney, you had thoughts?
Yeah, and I'd add to that sensor size, because, is it a Type C sensor? Is it full frame sensor? It's a 16:9 sensor. It's so confusing to me, I can't ever keep it straight.
It is. It's very complex, and it's one of those things where I think this is as much art as science. There is a science to it, of course, but I had a circumstance. Just because we have a little bit of time here, I was shooting at Comic-Con. I try to do that because that's my still photography thing. And one year I had a lens sitting around and I wasn't sure what to do with it, so I threw it in my bag. It was something I had rented for another project for somebody. And in the course of setting up to take shots at Comic-Con, I decided, what is that thing? And I put it on my camera, and it was really weird. I looked through the viewfinder and I went, oh, so this is some sort of crop sensor. I'm getting really bad vignetting and stuff like that. But I also saw something that I hadn't expected, and I took a whole series of pictures that year. And looking back, they're some of my favorite pictures I've ever taken because I used the wrong lens. I had literally taken something that I had no idea what I was doing with. I slapped it into a circumstance it wasn't really designed for, and I thought the results were beautiful. That, to me, is when you move beyond the technical side of a tool like a camera lens, and you get to see something interesting if you open yourself up to happy accidents. Courtney has a thought.
Yeah, that could be part of that category. Could be, accessories that modify the lens. Tele-extenders, there's a thing called Lens Baby that changes your depth of field focus, so it can make a wide shot look like it's a miniature that you shot it on tabletop, weird stuff like that. And there's a whole classification of lens modifiers that are out there that go behind the lens or between the lens and the camera that change the look and feel of the image.
Yeah, absolutely. Tilt shift lenses, which I played around with a little bit, are often used in architecture because, if you're in front of a building and the building goes up high, you're going to get all sorts of geometric distortion because the building kind of recedes away from you in space. So tilt shift lenses are around to re-square up what is a square building from the point of view of what the lens distortion is doing to it. So yeah, there's a ton to learn about lenses, and I find it a fascinating subject. David Brady?
Yeah, it could go back to Tom's question earlier about squeezing more from the equipment we have, and those happy little accidents are sometimes creatively awesome.
Absolutely, I agree with that 100%. Chris, next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. He has a link there to Atmos Effects, which does a great projector effects for holidays, not just Halloween. What about a second hour about that kind of specialty production or having them on?
John Preto.
Most of my Halloween effects are all from Atmos. They do a great job. So yes, I would love to have them on.
Cool. And learning about that, and it may give you some thoughts about different ways to shoot or different ways to edit or whatever. So yeah, fun. Next question.
Chad Lafarge, Missouri. I'd love to have some DMX control second hours. Are there other hardware control protocols and tools that would pair well with DMX as a second hour topic?
No one weighed in on this, but yeah, I think that, and we are hearing so much because of our community here about things like Isadora, the control things. So control protocols, I think, are very, very powerful. I know DMX in the lighting industry is pretty universal, and the fact that you can sit at your desk and have tremendous amounts of control over remote things does nothing but make any production project easier, because if you don't have to go grab the ladder and go up and fix something, that's a lot of time you save on set or on location. Mitchell, you had some thoughts?
Add MIDI to that list.
Oh, yeah, that's the same thing. MIDI is a similar protocol just for sound and patching and things like that. So yeah, definitely. All right, next question.
Guy Cochran, Seattle, USA, second hour with a YouTuber.
People talk about that a good little bit, and I think there's a lot of interest in that. Guy?
Yeah, I went to a show a while back, pre-COVID, called Vid Summit, and some of the speakers on the stage, like Mr. Beast, you wouldn't think, because he's pretty silly on some of his videos, but man, he showed how he creates thumbnails. He'll spend hours on a thumbnail, and so he broke it down how he would take a screenshot and look at it on mobile. So some of these types of folks that are really doing well in the YouTube space would be fascinating to have on the show, and there's quite a few that I think would be game for it. So I'll put a request in the second hour Discord and see if we can get you guys to vote some people up, and we'll get them in.
Chris Fenwick.
I was recently watching a YouTube channel that I enjoy a lot, and the guy let something slip that I thought was really interesting. He said, at a certain point, YouTube assigns you a liaison. And this guy only has like about 230,000 subscribers. So somewhere along the way, he gets assigned somebody to like check in with him, because if the YouTuber is successful, YouTube does better. So, but I thought that was super interesting that they actually will contact you and say, hey, we have some advice, some input we'd like to give you to improve your channel.
Absolutely. Courtney.
Yeah, a lot of these YouTubers are moving to mainstream. Even, Mark Rober is hosting the Jimmy Kimmel show tonight and last night. I think he's on for 3 days. So he's moved from, and he mentions the point that he has, 14.5 million subscribers or something, which is probably bigger than the Jimmy Kimmel audience out there. But nobody knows who he is. He stopped people on the street and asked him if they knew who he was. No, nobody knew who he was. But their kids know. That's the problem. Anybody over 30 didn't have a clue who he was, or over 50 didn't have a clue who he was. But those kids really knew who he was. So it's the YouTubers have their own little world, but now they're moving into mainstream media is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. And, this is all about eyeballs. Who's watching what? And we've been talking for a long time about the number of eyeballs watching traditional broadcasting continues to collapse, or not collapse, but it continues to diminish over time. It's just still a viable thing, and a lot of money is made there, a lot of money is spent there. But we can all see that the number of hours that eyes are on iDevices, phones, tablets, Samsung products, things like that, personal communication and content access devices, it's going in that direction. So these people were early in the process. There is, in the edge cases, massive amounts of success and money to be had there. And I think that's causing everybody to want to learn more and more about that. So my personal opinion is the more we can do to talk about how people succeed in that and learn more about that, the better off everyone in this place is going to be. Got two more questions.
Guy Cochran corrected me. Mark Rober has 22.1 million subscribers.
Yeah, that's a slightly different influencer level, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on. Two more questions.
Douglas Carmichael suggests Waves products and plugins. SoundGrid Studio, LV1, Super Rec.
Mitch, real quick, we might get cut off if Alex is going to punch the button on this.
I know Gilad Karen, the CEO of Waves, I have a request into him, Douglas, so maybe we'll hear from us soon.
And the last one, real fast.
Jason Robertshaw, I was trying to go too quickly there, from Sarasota, Florida. Anyone worked with Fred Garcia? He trains CEOs in the physicality of audience engagement and public speaking. Might make an interesting conversation with him or similar on how to deliver an effective TED-style talk.
It sounds really good. Put it in the thing and let's reach out to him. I think that takes us right up to 9 o'clock. So let's roll the credits. And I'm sorry I'm pushing a little bit over. If we dive out of this because Alex has pushed the button, I'm sorry about that. But thanks. And we'll see what happens tomorrow. Hopefully Alex will be back. If not, I'll be back here and we'll do it all again for Saturday. Thank you for watching.
He'll be back Sunday. He sent a message out in.
Oh, okay,
Discord.
great. So I'll be here tomorrow and he'll be here Sunday.
Do the thing. Close the show. Roll some graphics. There we go.
Thank you all on the panel for keeping my head above water with all those great answers.
Our pleasure. Good show, Bill.
Thank you.
Good being back in the saddle.
Go on IMDb and watch Shane Hurlbutt's demo reel. It's really great.
Nice.
Thanks, folks. See ya.
Yeah, I don't know about Fred Garcia, but Fred Garver, I've seen him.
Man. We'll leave it at that.